Welcome back to another video here at Seb's Garage. Today we are getting back to work on the Prelude, and hopefully this thing will be running by the end of the video, so let's get into it. On the last video, we left off with putting this powder coated valve cover on, sealing up the engine, and getting as much as possible buttoned up, including all the drive belts and everything. I finally was able to get all the little miscellaneous pieces that I've been missing, which is all of the coolant hoses. These are all silicone hoses, which should last basically for the life of the vehicle. And then I also was able to get the injectors serviced. I got these cleaned and they are working like they should. These are USDM injectors. The JDM ones are different. So these are what were on the engine prior when the car came in, not from the engine that was in it. And just because the health of that engine wasn't good, and because the car had been sitting for, I think, almost a year at this point, I just want to make sure that they were in proper condition and they're not going to be an issue. The last thing I want to do is have spent all this time and money putting, you know, this low mileage engine on this car, revamping the whole thing, and then end up causing some crazy damage because an injector is stuck open or stuck closed or whatever. So I'm going to take off the intake manifold and we're going to start doing all of the coolant stuff. Alright, I got this hunk of equipment out of there. The manifold does have like a butterfly valve, and it basically like has a short runner in a long runner format for torque purposes. So I'm gonna see if I can keep this one instead of the factory one that I have in the trunk. I had it over here, but it's in the trunk now. So I'm gonna see if I can keep the one that goes to the H series instead of the one that was on there. I just gotta make sure that all of the EVAP stuff will hook up like it needs to so it doesn't get a CEL. And then I started putting some of the coolant hoses in place. So I'm going to go ahead and knock all of these out and show you what it looks like afterwards. All right, we've got most of the hoses on and tightened. We've got the two radiator hoses right there. We've got the two heater hoses, one right here, the other one back there. We've got the ones that go to the valve. I do need to get some more clamps at the auto parts store tomorrow. And then there are two little guys that go to the oil cooler down there that I still have to put on, but I also need clamps for those. So I think the next thing is going to be the fuel filter. I got a brand new fuel filter, which I'm going to write the date on, so in the future the last service date will be written on it. Also, just, you know, good cheap insurance. Car's been sitting, don't know what kind of fuel's been in there, what kind of grime's built up in there. Cheap part, good to do. And then here you can see the difference between these are the JDM injectors and those are the USDM injectors. You see that those are fatter, they have a slightly different plug, and they are also a slightly different height, as you can see right there. So I'll be running those with new O-rings on them. These are all of the hoses that I replaced, so all of those will be getting tossed. I also did use new stainless clamps. Worm gear is usually not my preferred method of doing things, but for this it works, especially with these multi-ply hoses, these silicone hoses. They don't tend to tear as much as the regular style hoses do. There was one here, you can see this end is all sorts of, you know, like flared out and terrible looking because I had a worm gear clamp screwing that up. So yeah, gonna do some more stuff back there behind underneath where intake manifold goes, like the fuel filter and some other stuff, before putting the fuel filter back in. And then I think before the manifold, I'm gonna clean up the wire harness and get that at least laid out. I think access will be easier before the manifold goes back in, so that'll probably be one of the next things I do. So yeah, gonna get to it and show you when I have more progress. All right, plumbing completed. We've got all the hoses now with all the hose clamps. I went ahead and got the last ones that I needed back there. I replaced the two hoses going to the oil cooler here. I did new hoses for the transmission oil cooler there. I was able to retain the spring clamps on those, since these are just like an OE replacement hose and it's not thicker hose like these guys. So yeah, we got a new fuel filter right back there with the date on it. So this guy, pretty sure it was OEM and had never been done. No, actually it was a frame, so it's been replaced at some point, probably when the F20 was done. So next, before doing all of the intake stuff, I'm gonna go ahead and grab this harness, clean this thing up because it's covered in oil in certain parts and some plugs are soaked in crap, so I've got contact cleaner for those, and then we'll get it all plugged into the car. Turn that off, and yeah, get everything routed. It'll be a lot easier to do without the intake manifold in the way. Get everything plugged in as much as I can before doing intake manifold and getting this thing closer to running. So gonna get at it, put you on a time lapse, and get it done. Got most of the wiring hooked up. I got all the charge harness stuff done. I cleaned up this plastic cover so it looks nice with a new valve cover. Everything that will be going on top of the intake manifold is just kind of dangling off to the side. All of these plugs here on the strut tower is like the main section of harness that hooks to the body harness. So this is where the engine and body harness split. And all these connectors were just completely covered in oil and gunk. There was an axle boot that was leaking and just spewing stuff all over the seam here, which you might have seen me clean in the last video. I got most of the transmission stuff done. I do still have to do the ones that are by the wheel well, which I'm going to do in a minute here when I put the car up in the air. I'm also going to do the oxygen sensor wiring at that point, and there is a knock sensor that's kind of dug up underneath that I'm going to get at. And I also found that there's a couple of sensors that are broken. This is a thermostat. There's one there. There's a fan switch sensor and thermostat. There's another one down there underneath the distributor. I'm going to see if I can salvage those off of the old engine setup. If I can't, then I'm just going to order new ones. I do still have the engine back here that I can poach stuff from. At the same time, I'm going to look at the old intake manifold that was on the F-Series, compare that to the H23 one, and see if I can make the H-Series one work with all the emissions components on the Prelude, because I would like to keep things matching if I can help it. So yeah, I'm going to see what all I can get, probably order a couple more things, and continue working on this thing. It's getting closer and closer every hour, so making good progress. Alright, so I got all of the wiring for transmission completed. I got some of this wiring back here. There's one for the power steering pressure sensor, knock sensor, O2, all of that runs down here. I got that knocked out of the way. So the next thing will be intake manifold. Actually, I was able to source the two sensors that I need to swap out. So I'm going to do those real quick and then do intake manifold. The intake manifold is kind of a weird design. You'll see that it splits right in the middle. So it's three pieces. You've got the lower, you've got the butterfly valve, and this basically just makes it that you have short runners and long runners for the intake manifold, which are better for certain RPM ranges. And then you've got the upper intake manifold, which is like the plenum. So the lowers, the part number that's stamped into them is actually the same. So I'm going to use the one that came with the engine because just it's cleaner and it's in better shape. And then I'm going to also use the butterflies from that if they are the same. and use the upper that came with the car, because it looks like the emissions components are a little bit different, at least enough to where it'll make a difference. So I'll clean this up, and then I've got new gaskets for all of it since I bought the master kit for it. And then after all of that is sorted, there is a crazy amount of vacuum lines that like runs that whole system and everything. Then I can do fuel system stuff, but I'm gonna sort that crazy vacuum line headache first, and then we'll do fuel and put fluids in it and see if it'll crank. So yeah, gonna get to it. This is the part of working on cars that people don't tell you about, when you basically have to work blindly up in the crevices, giving your car a colonoscopy just to get stuff done, trying to get all the electrical and vacuum hoses done on this thing. And yeah, we're up in there. So getting pretty close to having all the wiring completed. But yeah, gonna bring this down and then get the upper plenum on and see if we can get fluids in this thing and not leak everything out. All right, so we got all the fuel system components completed, EGR on, tidied up a lot more of the wiring and stuff here. I dug the throttle linkage out of the way. We got some more vacuum nightmare stuff to plumb everywhere once the top of the manifold goes on. I got the butterfly valve system in, got everything sorted underneath. Now I have to put in the plenum, plumb up some coolant lines, some vacuum hoses, finish up some more wiring. This is a little bit of a vacuum nightmare just because it's old tech and everything's driven by vacuum. So between all data and some Googling, I'm trying to decipher all of the lines, make sure everything is routed correctly so the stuff works like it's supposed to. After that, we're going on a little shopping trip and buying fluids. So I'm gonna knock this out real quick, or will be quick to you, probably not so much for me, and then we'll go shopping. Intake manifold is complete. We have all of the coolant hoses, vacuum lines, emissions components, everything on and done. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean up, get in the car, and go shop for fluids so we can get everything in here, make sure there's no leaks, and try to turn it over. And we've got fluids. So we've got OEM Honda ATF. This is something that I always spend a little extra and do OEM, especially automatic transmissions. It's something I don't want to mess with using fluid that is not up to spec and could cause problems. Those are expensive repairs if anything does happen. Power steering fluid, make sure you are using something that is specific for Honda vehicles. If you are doing stuff on a Honda, they like to leak if you just use standard fluid. We've got some full synthetic 5W30. This could take 5 or 10. I'm doing 5 for now. We'll see if it burns a lot or whatever. Then we'll do a 10. I do want to do like a seafoam treatment or whatever on this, just to try to clean up some of the gunk, because the engine did sit for a while and there was a little bit of buildup in some areas. And then we've got some blue, also Honda specific coolant to go in there. I checked the battery on this and it's reading at around 12.1, 12.2. So may or may not need to get that charged, but for the meantime, I'm gonna unplug injectors after doing all the fluids, unplug injectors and crank it over and try to build up some oil pressure. before plugging injectors back in and actually trying to get it to fire. Also during that time, while the injectors are unplugged, we'll see if there are any leaks with oiling system, cooling system, fuel system. Transmission fluid probably won't build up any pressure until the engine's running. Same with power steering. I think it's not going to build up very much pressure. But just make sure you give everything a good once-over before we actually try to fire it. So yeah, let's start filling this thing up and hope nothing leaks. All right, fluids are topped off. Haven't done coolant yet because I want to make sure that I can get this thing running just in case anything needs to come apart. I don't want to be spilling a bunch of stuff. Batteries on. Injectors are unplugged back here. The harness is all loose. I don't have the intake duct in yet because this is getting replaced since this is all messed up. And just as a precaution, we've got a fire extinguisher nearby. Not that I think I'll need it, but I'd rather be prepared in case I do. So let's turn this thing over, see if it cranks, and see if we can build some oil pressure. I might have to add a jumper pack just because the battery is like full enough, but on the lower side. So let's see what happens. We have lights. That's a good sign. Cranking strong. That's another good sign. Let's see if I can crank enough to get this oil light to go away. Oil light hasn't come off, but I think that should be enough priming to try to get this thing started. So let's do a once over, make sure there's no leaks. Well, it looks like we have a small fuel leak right there coming from the back of the fuel filter. So I'm going to see if that's just not tightened up enough and if we can fix that before plugging everything back in and try to get this thing running. I was able to get up underneath there with some extensions and a crow's foot and tighten stuff up. I had to snake my way underneath by the subframe and stuff. The fuel filter is like tucked up on the strut tower behind the manifold and stuff. I didn't want to have to take the manifold and all the vacuum craziness back apart to get to it. I was able to get like maybe an 1/8 of a turn on it, but I cycled the key a bunch of times and that seemed to be enough to get it to stop leaking. So I'm going to clean all that up and then plug injectors back in and see if we can get this thing to fire. Well, maybe fire is not the right word to use. See if we can get it started. Here goes nothing. Let's try some starting fluid. I don't know how old this gas is. Attempt number 2 with starter fluid. Ooh, it wanted to. Alright, we're going to try some starting fluid while my lovely assistant in there is trying to crank. So, let's see if this works. Go ahead. Okay. Well, that was anticlimactic. Pulled the plug. So I figured there's probably no spark. It was wet. We've got fuel. Got a ground strap directly from battery to the plug. Still nothing. No spark. So, I'm going to have to see if I can diag and see what the heck's going on. And why this thing's not throwing any spark. Get back to you when I find something out. After a bunch of time spent going through things, making sure power is going to where power is supposed to go, and all the fuses and relays and all the electrical is on par, and testing out the distributor itself, you know, on the bench with the multimeter, and same with the external ignition coil and all that. This isn't really how I wanted to end the video, but it looks like I'm going to have to actually order a new OEM USDM oil pump for the car. The crankshaft position sensor is not like it is on Civics and Integras, and it can't just be bypassed through the distributor like it can on other cars. It is something that is necessary for this car to know where the engine is and to fire. So that's the reason the distributor was not working, we were not getting ignition, and the car was not starting. The oil pump that is currently on this engine, I think, is from an older model. Usually there's a little stamps on the head and you can tell dates, but I don't see one on here. So I think that this was an older OBD1 engine, and it didn't have the provisions for the crankshaft position sensor. And I don't want to use the other oil pump because that is used and has some wear that I am not comfortable reusing. So, gonna have to order an oil pump. They are supposedly still available OEM. I'm hoping that's the case and when I can get one in short order. But it is going to be a special order. It's probably going to be a week or two to get. And unfortunately, not going to happen in this video. But on the next one, I'm hoping to tear the whole engine back down, replace the oil pump, add the crank sensor, wire it up, and start it. Also, bleed cooling system, and hopefully get this thing driving. Until then, I'm going to put this thing on the side. We're going to continue doing some more fit stuff. And yeah, kind of sucks, but this is how stuff goes sometimes when you are putting engines in cars that didn't come with them. You come across stuff like this, and as unfortunate as it is, at least there is a solution, and we will make it work. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.